Hey there, my name's Andrea Gaughan and I'm a knitwear designer based in Asheville, North Carolina. And today I'm going to be doing an AMA, which if you're not familiar with it, is Ask Me Anything, where I just asked you guys here on YouTube and also on Instagram to let me know any questions you might be interested in knowing about myself or my design work or my thoughts on knitting. And I really appreciate everyone who sent in some questions. I compiled them, I put them in like a rough order, and a couple of them I combined. But I have here some notes on all the questions. I want to make sure I didn't forget any, so I have them all written out here. And I ended up combining them into 13 different questions I'm going to go through today. And they are a lot about knitting and design, and a couple about adjacent topics. So let's get started. The first thing I will answer is how did you start knitting? Tell us about why you started knitting. So I first started knitting when I was quite little. I really can't remember the age, but maybe like late elementary school or early middle school. My grandmother taught me, she knit and crocheted a lot. She was an Irish immigrant and knitted up until when she passed at the age of 96 or 97 about a year ago. And so that was really cool to be around and introduced to knitting, but all I did then was knit garter rectangles, and maybe one was a pot holder or something, but I didn't really knit anything I ever used. But I kind of had the knowledge of how to do it from that. And then when I was older, around 20, I started really wanting to knit as a creative outlet and actually make things I could wear. And I started like at Michael's buying knitting books and yarn, and I even went to a really nice yarn shop in Ann Arbor one time and got myself nice sock yarn. But I had a really big like mental block about just starting to try. So I think it was around when I was 24, which was 5 years ago, that I really got the courage to do anything more than like dishcloths. Was pretty much all I had done up till then, beyond those initial garter days. I think I tried a sock and like immediately gave up, but when I was 24, I was doing an internship at this place that taught classes, and someone came in for a class and they were knitting socks. And just seeing someone in real life knitting socks that were super cute, and she said she knit a bunch and wore them all the time, I'm like, okay, she can do that, I can do it. And she was very encouraging after I talked to her about it. And after that, I figured out how to do it. I knit my first pair of socks with like a worsted weight yarn. It was super tight gauge that weren't very wearable, but was quickly able to just feel comfortable knitting some vanilla socks, and did that for quite a long time. About a year or two I just knit socks, and then several years ago I started trying to do garments, and I'll talk more about when I got into non-sock garments a bit later. So yeah, anyway, for references with those ages, I'm 29 now, so I really only started doing garments about 5 years ago, but I have known the basics of knitting since I was young. Okay, the second question is, what was the first project I did with circular needles? And that leads into the first garment. So the first sweater I knit, I got Knit Picks interchangeable circulars and used those for a long time. I eventually upgraded to Chiagu's, and actually I gave my mom the Knit Pick circulars, but they're very nice too. And I knit Odell by Sierra Morningstar, which I have no idea now how I came across it, but I was on like the Ravelry Hot Right Now and the Reddit r/knitting a lot, seeing what people were doing, so I probably discovered that pattern in one of those. But it's a cabled sweater. I'll put a photo of it here, and I was like, that's gorgeous, that's what I want to knit. And I got the yarn for it and knit it, and I successfully knit the whole sweater, but it super did not fit at all, because I thought I was really smart and knew about blocking, but when I blocked my swatch of cables, I basically stretched it out as far as was possible, which I kind of thought for some reason that was the point of blocking, is to stretch it out as much as you can. And so that meant the sweater was way too small. But I learned a good lesson with that. I enjoyed the process of knitting it, and since knit many sweaters that I loved, and I think that was the only one that I ever knit that was like truly unwearable. And that was just completely my own misunderstanding of what blocking a swatch meant. But yeah, I really like circular needles. I now knit all of my socks with magic loop, but when I first started I was using DPNs because they were available to me. I think someone had donated a bunch of knitting supplies to that place I was interning, so I think there were just a bunch of DPNs already available, and I learned on those. Okay. Number 3, someone asked, what are your other hobbies? So I wrote all these things out and I was like, wow, I have a lot of hobbies. But really what I do is I spend most of my time knitting, and these things kind of come and go of how much time I actually spend on them. But my like number one favorite hobby and thing to do is hiking, and then also specifically going hiking with the intention of birding, or going hiking with the intention of plant ID, and specifically I really like doing wildflower ID like in the spring and summer. And so that's the one I've stayed with the most consistently for a long time, and I always love, but I feel like I would love to do a really good hike every weekend. I live in western North Carolina in the Blue Ridge Mountains, so there's tons of places I can go in not too far of a drive, which is amazing, but I haven't been prioritizing making sure that I leave time for it, and then by the time the weekend comes, there's just so much other stuff going on. But this summer, I really want to check out more places. If you are in this area or familiar with it, let me know your suggested places to go. There's honestly so many, it can be hard to choose. I've been to a couple, but I know there's like a long list of places that I should check out around here that I haven't yet. One of my absolute favorite things that I've been doing the past couple weeks is watching nature documentaries. Every time I get back into that, I'm like, this is just what makes me happy. It's just like the ultimate relaxing thing for me. I love every David Attenborough documentary series that exists, which I've watched quite a few of. He did, even before the Planet Earth and Blue Planet ones, he did some more like specific, a whole series about reptiles and a whole series about, I think, like insects, and those are really cool. But just recently I've been watching Netflix's Night on Earth, where they use infrared camera, and I think they have a couple different types of camera, but they use different technology to be able to see at nighttime things that aren't visible with the human eye, and talking about animal behaviors, and a lot of animal behaviors at night that people didn't even know happened until recently, and that was really cool. So if you like nature documentaries, I definitely recommend that one. And I end up watching quite a bit of TV, honestly, because I do so much knitting. A lot of times with my designs, I'm like, I just want to get this done, and I'll just watch a random Netflix show. But besides nature documentaries, what I really enjoy and feel like adds value to my life when I watch it is comedies, and some of my all-time favorites that I've rewatched recently are Broad City and What We Do in the Shadows. I also recently watched Girls Five Eva, which was really cute and funny. And then a main thing that I do a lot, especially since I moved to Asheville, is checking out different breweries and trying out different beers. My partner and I both love beer, so it's always a fun thing, and I like just checking out new places. There's a basically unlimited amount of breweries to check out in Asheville, so we've probably still only gone to a third as people who go to breweries all the time. And then I really like board games, especially I like cooperative board games. We have Spirit Island, which, if you're not familiar with it, is a game where it's like the opposite of Settlers of Catan or a game like that where you're the settlers. The settlers are the enemies and you play as forces of nature, and the settlers are coming in and you have to kill them. And I love that game, and you work together, and there's different like forces of nature that work together, and there's also some are there's native inhabitants of the land, and they work together with the forces of nature, and the concept's cool, and then the gameplay's really cool. So if you're into board games at all, I would definitely check that one out if you haven't already. It's one of those ones that it takes a long time to learn, but it's totally worth it. And I dabble in sewing. I'm looking over at my sewing machine. It is covered in piles of yarn and projects, and I have not done that nearly as much as I'd like to. And recently, what has kind of been my main hobby, I'd say, if it counts as a hobby that I've been focusing on, is running, which is extremely new to me to be taking seriously. Like, I've run a little for exercise on and off over the years, but I just did a 5K, and then I decided I really liked the process of preparing for that, and I am going to do a half marathon in September, the very end of September. And so I'm just starting on training for that, but previously the most I've ever run is 7 miles, so this is, that would be nearly double. So it'll be a big undertaking, but I'm really excited about it. And like, when I got into the knitting world, I like being able to get into something that you go online and like, oh, there's a huge amount of people making content about running on YouTube and writing articles about it, and like Reddit subreddits about it. So that's been cool to just get into something like totally new, because when I ran for exercise, I never like looked at any of that stuff. So yeah, those are some of the things I do outside of knitting, but honestly, day to day, the main thing I do is knitting. Okay, question number 4. I'm gonna keep track as I go through these. I'm hoping not to have this be too long. I might break it in halfway through. Let's see how much time it actually takes. I was like, oh, I'll give each of these like a minute long answer, but I feel like that is not the pace we are going at right now. Okay, number 4, a kind person asked, what is your background? Have you studied something connected to textiles or maybe to math? I mean, anything that is connected to actual designing. No, I've absolutely not studied anything or had a background that was related to actual designing. I do have a background related to math. I have actually a degree in physics and astronomy. I got like a double major in those two when I went to school. And the reason I basically picked physics is because I think it's interesting, but I really liked the type of work. I really did not like subjects in school that were about writing essays and that kind of thing, but I really like the problem solving of physics and math. So that's basically why I went on that path, because I would enjoy that type of work, but I never really felt like this is my calling. Like, I think humans just need to learn even more about physics. I think it's interesting to know about, but and then after doing internships at universities, I just was like, the world of academia is not how I want to be spending my life. I don't want to be, and after all, I was like, oh, I don't like writing papers. I'm like, oh, then you're writing papers. Like, that's what you're really doing if you're a physicist at a university most of the time. Like, even if you do lab work, it's all written into papers, and I really liked the puzzles of doing problems, but I felt like lab work and writing papers and doing academia stuff was just not interesting or appealing to me, so I never pursued that after school, after I completed my schooling. And I actually totally switched gears and did organic farming for years after that, until I eventually came to what I'm doing now. But I do think I have I'm very familiar with math problem solving, so that helps a lot with the construction and grading part of design, and I knew that that was something I enjoyed doing. So that was a pretty big factor that I liked the idea of designing, but I was like, okay, I think I have enough not that you absolutely do not need a degree in physics or math to do designing, but I was like, okay, it's something I'm comfortable with, I know I like, so I thought that that was a thing that would be a good fit for me about designing. But I definitely didn't have any background in textiles or art or design or anything like that. Okay, I got a coffee right before this, so it's good to I'll take another sip of my coffee between each question. Okay. I really liked this next question. What's a color combination you haven't knit yet, but absolutely want to? And I actually have a really specific answer to this that I think about all the time. And I feel like this question being asked is like, I have to push myself to actually do it. But I really want to do something that has a combination of orange and magenta, or like, I think magenta can be a lot of different colors, but like a deep pinkish purple. Cause I worked at a flower shop, and that was the owner, she was the person who trained me to make arrangements. That was like her favorite color combination. Whatever we got in flowers that were like that deep pink purple, she was always like, oh, put them with the orange lilies. Like they always look so good together. And I think she was really right. And I love that those are not two colors because they're both pretty intense colors that I would think to put together, but they always just were the flower arrangement that went first out of the case once we made it. But those are definitely outside of my normal range for clothing, but I've been thinking that I would like to try that, but I think I need to pick out the yarn in person to make sure I like the two colors together, because if one color you order online is not exactly what you expected, it's fine, but if you get two, there's a lot more risk. So that's something I want to keep an eye out for if I come across yarn that has shades of those colors I really like and really like together. That is like a more fun color combo that I would really like to try out. Oh, I would love to hear your answers to this one, like, because I know a lot of people have like go-to, but I like the question is not what are your favorite color combinations, like what are your favorite color combinations that you haven't tried? So if you guys have answers to that, let me know the answer. I would be very interested, and you guys might give me some inspiration as well. Okay. All right, I'm laughing about this next one because I went way overboard with my prep for this question, and I was like, I wrote enough stuff here to do a whole video on this question, which is not what I'm trying to do. So the question is, how do you feel about queer representation in the knitting world? So if you don't know, I'm queer, I'm pansexual, and probably also non-binary. Honestly, I don't like actually identify as non-binary, but I feel like it's mostly a technicality. Like, I feel like the societal definition of female definitely does not fit me, but I feel like the problems with the societal definition of female, not. Anyway, so I'm maybe non-binary questioning, but definitely identify as queer and pansexual. And I thought that this was a really interesting question because it kind of made me think that the person asking it, and if that was you, let me know if I'm totally off on this. And also I'm leaving the questions anonymous. Some of them I'm combining a couple people's questions, and then I guess when I asked I never like made it clear that probably it would be fine for me to say who they're all from. But if any of these are your questions, thank you, and I hope you're not offended that I'm not saying who asked each specific one. But for the person who asked this question, I would be really curious to know if they asked that because they felt like they don't see enough queer representation in the knitting world. That's kind of what it makes me think. But actually, I feel personally like I see a lot of queer representation in the knitting world, and way more queer representation than any other aspect of my life or area of society or niches that I'm involved in. Like, it's the area that I see the most queer representation of everything, so I really love that. I follow a lot of people on Instagram who are always posting things about Pride, and especially this past month, people doing things where they're donating percentages of sales to things like the Trevor Project and other nonprofits focused on helping queer folks. And yeah, so I don't know. I was like, is it weird that my answer is like really good? I love it. Cause I mean, like everything, I think there's always probably room for more visibility, but, and I feel like that has to do with how I curate online who I'm following. And I might have a really skewed perspective because I just like follow any queer knitter basically I come across. And so I made a list of 25 queer knitters on Instagram, and I was gonna talk about all of them, but I was like, that is way too much for one question. So what I'm gonna do is just shout out a couple of them and then I'll link all of them below. This is by no means an exhaustive list, and I also hope to dear God I'm correctly identifying all these people. I tried to make sure, like, look through and make sure I had some kind of concrete thing, because basically there's a much wider list of people than this that I believe are queer, and I think I've seen something, but it's an interesting thing about visibility because I definitely try really hard that I do not do the straight until proven queer. Like, I do not assume someone's straight just because I have never heard them say, hi, I'm queer, you know? Anyway, number one, gotta shout out Jacqueline Sislak. Also, deeply apologize for any mispronunciation of names, because most of these people I interact with online only, unfortunately, or at the rare case of getting to go to like a knitting festival. But yeah, Jacqueline Sislak is like my queer knitting icon, and she's just so cool, and she makes beautiful designs. I just love her styling, and I love the things she posts about, like her 2 adorable dogs, and she's always posting a lot of stuff about like activism for free Palestine and all that kind of stuff. So if there's some reason that you're not following Jacqueline Sislak, like, you definitely have to. Another person who is a general idol of mine in the knitwear world is Ysolda Teague, and she's queer. Yeah, she actually has a YouTube podcast that you should definitely check out that she has started pretty recently. And then, yeah, like I said, I'm not going to go down the whole list, but I have been grateful to, since moving to Asheville, meet actual, in real life, queer knitting friends. So shout out to Josh and Donnie. I put Josh's Instagram in the list. He has test knit for me and also been my friend that I met at midnight. And I wanna, now I'm like, oh my god, I don't want to not shout out people on my list, but I just don't think I should go into my whole list. But Elizabeth Margaret Knits is a designer that she is someone I got to know when I was first starting design and was really supportive. She's a very cool person. Amy Share Makes is also another queer designer who has been kind enough to like answer lots of questions for me and makes beautiful, beautiful garments. James and Watts, I love seeing. I don't know if he's podcasting very regularly now, but he was in the past. I do believe he uses he pronouns. I know he, they, she, as far as I know, uses all pronouns. Last I saw, I guess. And I made sure a lot of these people are designers, but I made sure to put some dyers in. Jude Harper of Stranded Dye Works is a queer dyer that makes beautiful things. Ash Alberg of Sunflower Knit does natural dyeing, and she's also queer, doing cool things. I really like seeing the work of both Max the Knitter and Vincent, who is the dyer of Bidell's, and Max and Knitter does designs, and together they're a couple and have a yarn shop, which is just like, they got it all going on. They're queer, they're dyeing, they're making knitting patterns, they have yarn shops, so that's like the total package. They're cool. I always like to see what they're doing. Someone who I just love seeing all their content is Caitlin of Stitchy Queer, who has a new baby, and she's posted pictures of like matching sewn outfits or knitted outfits, and I just eat that shit up. Like, I love it. It's so cute. Tangles and Starlight, Tazi, is a knitter, spinner, podcaster that I met really briefly at Rhinebeck and is super cool. I also put a couple of people on here who are test knitters who have worked with me. Caitlin Schaefer, Goth Grandma 27, and Abby Flab Maid. Super cool people. And I'm gonna cut myself off there. More people on this list, I would just go through and check them out. If you feel like you don't see enough queer representation, these are people that are sharing their work, are out and proud, and I enjoy seeing. But I honestly feel like when I am encountering people, or if I see someone is following me, like has followed me, and I'll go look on Instagram, it's like queer neurodivergent knitter. And I'm like, yep, that's all of us, isn't it? So I feel like, to me, that feels like the norm. But again, as a queer neurodivergent person, it's like the people I've enjoyed surrounding myself with. So I have no idea how much I've like entrenched myself in a niche, or if you also feel like you guys see lots of queer representation in the knitting world. Okay, let me move along to the next question here. So number 7, tips for working with plant-based fibers. About to start Helianthus and Undine. Very happy for you. That is a tank pattern I released last summer. I love that pattern. I've already made it 3 times, and I have a 4th one on my needles. All of them are in Undine, which is a cotton linen blend from Ritual Dyes that I really, really enjoy working with. Gotta make my coffee. But I was thinking about this one. I was like, I don't feel like I have good advice for how to work with plant-based fibers, because I just enjoy it, and I hear that people say they don't enjoy it. So it's hard for me to know what my advice would be to someone who feels like that, but I tried my best to see what my advice would be. One is to make a large swatch to get used to the difference, because if you always knit with wool, it's going to feel different, and it'd be good to make sure you have enough time in knitting that swatch to, one, get accustomed to it so that your gauge is going to be reflecting what the project will actually be, but also just to get comfortable with it before you start the garment. Like, what is this feeling like? How is it different? How is it the same? And so especially if you skimp on swatching at all, or you make like the tiniest swatch possible, I would, if you're, you know, just getting used to plant fibers for the full time, do like a full 6" by 6" swatch and just let yourself get comfortable with working with that fiber. And then you can always unravel that when you're done blocking it and getting your gauge information, and start your project with it, so you don't have to feel worried about wasting some of your yarn. And I hear a lot of people like to use wooden needles, that if you feel like the stitches are too slippery, because they are going to be more slippery than when you're using a wool yarn. If that is something that bothers you or doesn't feel comfortable, a lot of people like wooden needles. I personally just use the metal needles I use for everything, and I find that very comfortable. And I think this is the best thing I can say, and it's just hard for me to know how helpful this advice would be to someone else, but I would just say don't expect it to be wool. I suspect that might be why people don't like working with plant fibers, just because if you're used to something being this way all the time, when you're working with a completely different material that feels different, behaves differently, I feel like it's possible that your negative reaction is just because it's different. So I think maybe if you just go into it expecting it's gonna be different, it's not gonna be wool, and not just experiencing it for what it is and not saying, oh, this is worse because it's not XYZ, it's not stretchy or fluffy like wool. That's me doing my best to answer that question because I love working with plant-based fibers. This is a cotton merino, so, you know, mixed with cotton and merino. Oh, I didn't even say, this is my sunshine tee. We have a knit along still going. There's another knit along going. This is something I've talked about a lot, but that is what I'm wearing. Meant to do that at the beginning of the video. But I've used Knitting for All's Pure Silk a couple times, and I love that yarn. I've used Undine quite a bit. Honestly, I go back and forth between those two so much. I've definitely worked with Isager's Cotton Linen Blend, and I think that's honestly pretty similar in my experience to Undine. And I've knit with some pure linen yarns, but I don't know that I've ever actually completed a garment. I've like swatched with them. But this Knitting for All of Silk, Knitting for All of Cotton Merino, and Ritual Dyes Undine are all yarns I've loved using. They do not feel like wool, but I love how they do feel, and I love the resulting fabric that they make. All right, I need to come up and see where we're at with time. Oh, all right. Okay, we are at half an hour, and I am halfway through my questions, so we're gonna call this a part 1, but it actually works out really well because the remaining questions are all about specifically designing, and I kind of try to group them. So let's say next time I will do a part 2, and for a preview of what those questions will be, they are: do you design full-time? What made you want to start designing? How did you decide to make it your work? What resources helped you? What do you recommend to people who want to start designing? What's your advice to novice designers? Where do you get your design inspiration? What designers have inspired you? And then a very thoughtful question from Josh about what direction my design work is going. Let's definitely make that into a second video. So thank you so much for watching this. I hope that you found it interesting. If you have any other questions about my design work, if you sneak it in the comments, I could try to sneak it into that second part 2 that I'm gonna do. Let me know if this is a type of content you're interested in. I wanted to do this because it's like a basically easier format to start doing something that's not a podcast. But I want to start doing other videos on specific topics. So if you have other specific topics you'd like me to share my experience with or give demonstrations of, please let me know. And of course, if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel to make sure you check out all those new videos when they happen, as well as my regular podcasts I do. And also like this video if you got this far. Hopefully you did like it. Okay, well, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.